Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see you all again. I wanted to talk for just a few minutes about social stratification. Social stratification makes reference to the sociologically scientific study of social inequality as it occurs in societies, both historic and current. The United States is a social class system. It's an open system of stratification. Open systems of stratification allow for vertical social mobility. Vertical social mobility is a very important concept. Vertical social mobility makes reference to the potential to move from one layer to another within a social stratification system. Not all social stratification systems are open. Some are closed. In a closed system, an individual's status is permanent, fixed, meaning that whatever they're born into ends up being their fate. I love that fellow next door. He obviously has a lot that the world needs to hear from him. But getting back on point, closed social stratification systems are systems that do not allow for vertical social mobility. As I said, a person's status, their occupational and economic status tends to be fixed. The least humane of these closed social stratification systems would be, of course, slavery, where one person is owned by another. And I don't have to go into a great detail about that. The United States was one of the last countries to abolish slavery, but the fact of the matter is that slavery still occurs in the world today. In fact, I had the privilege, I should say, of working with another sociologist who also did research in Amsterdam, Holland. His name is Gustav Rick. And, Rick and I essentially colluded in that I rewrote his lengthy paper into a shorter one in order to make it more ideal for presentation at conferences of the American Sociological Association and the Society for the Study of Social Problems in New York City that year. At any rate, his paper was entitled Prostitution in the Wallen. Isn't it nice? There's a fire station across the street. Can you hear the alarm? That's telling them they have to go take care of someone. Heart attack, chest pains, someone's passed out, possibly a drug overdose, or there is that small chance it's actually a fire. The announcement's on right now, though. I'm sure you can hear it in the background. It gives this recording sort of a surrealistic quality, doesn't it? I believe it does. So, as I said, in a closed system, a person's social status is permanently determined at birth. The type of closed social stratification system that we find in India is called a caste system. A caste system is a system where in which a person's status, their occupational and economic status, is determined on the basis of whatever their parents had been before them. And this should ring a bell in your memory because feudal Europe during the medieval period, during the pre-industrial period, was also a caste system where an individual's occupation was determined at birth on the basis of their parents' ascribed characteristics. Of course, the caste system in Europe eventually broke down and became a class system, one that does, in fact, afford for vertical social mobility, for the chance to change one's lot in life, if you will. Excuse me one moment. How can you not love a fire truck, right? Okay. How did the caste system in Europe eventually transform into a social class system? It happened because of the expansion of the division of labor. When Johann Gutenberg invented essentially the movable type printing press, he also invented a new occupation. And the new occupation was the typesetter, the individual who actually placed the type into the plates that allowed the printing press to print. And so, therefore, as new occupations occur within a society, there are no parents who do those occupations, and this allows and affords for the opportunity for individuals who had previously been trapped, if you will, in whatever their lot in life was, to move into something new and to potentially be able to achieve a higher income, perhaps a better livelihood and lifestyle for themselves. The same is true, and is it happening in India today? In fact, it has been now for some number of decades. The development of the personal computer back in the late 1980s is essentially began to be a prominent thing, actually impacted the Indian economy in many ways, mainly because so many new occupations were available for Indians to take up and to become trained in, to become experts at, that many people who had been previously locked into disadvantageous social caste positions were allowed, in fact, to achieve vertical social mobility. While India is still a caste system, it has many of the vestiges of the early emerging social class system in Europe during the early industrial period. Karl Marx taught us quite a lot about social class. Mainly, he makes us aware of the fact that such a phenomenon is real. Different individuals do, in fact, belong to different large groups within societies that have different economic interests and have differential access to and or control over valued resources such as education, healthcare, living arrangements, and so on. The social class system for Karl Marx was fairly cut and dried, as you may recall. Essentially, there were two social classes: the ownership class, who owns property that produces income for themselves. That's what we call capital. And, of course, the labor class. Those would be people who do not own income-producing property, and therefore must sell their labor in order to survive. The bourgeoisie class and the proletariat class, respectively. I shouldn't have to tell you that Karl Marx's ideas are central, a central focus, you might say, to the conflict theory or critical theory paradigm within sociology, which is principally concerned with social inequality. Conflict theoretical analyses of social inequality are diverse, but in large part, the most accurate way to understand the economic picture with regards to the distribution of resources and how it's heavily stacked towards the top. Structural functionalists, however, see social inequality as potentially useful. And in fact, since social inequality is a cultural universal, and we've heard and used this concept before, we know, in fact, that it must be functional from the perspective of the structural functionalists. Those things which are cultural universals must be functional, and social inequality must be functional. One particular discussion of the, shall we say, functionality of social inequality, one which is tends to receive quite a lot of focus in introductory sociology courses, is the Davis-Moore thesis. Kingsley Davis and Wilbur Moore were sociologists who essentially put together the argument from the structural functionalist perspective that social inequality is not only functional but is essential for society's well-being. The fundamental argument goes something like this: every single society has important tasks that must be accomplished and important positions that must be filled. These important tasks and important occupations and so on require a great deal of talent, and most also require a large amount of education and developed skill, experience. The third one of their premises is that these positions, these most important positions, must be filled by the most qualified people. And in keeping with the previous premises I've just mentioned, these positions should be the most highly paid among those in society. Of course, they further go on to add the idea that these positions should be functionally unique. So those individuals who provide something for you which almost no one can should be rewarded in a greater way. But these premises, which lead to the conclusion, have some degree of debatability, and that's what I'd like to bring up. Let's start with that first premise, shall we? Every society has important tasks that must be accomplished and important positions that must be filled. Well, that is true, it would seem, on the surface, but it does rely upon subjectivity. Subjectivity in that, who is it that decides which tasks are most important? Yes, as Davis and Moore would suggest, the brain surgeon must be someone who's intelligent, they must be someone who's talented, they must be someone who's dedicated a great deal of time to their education and to their training. However, is the brain surgeon more important than the street sweeper that prepares the sidewalk and the steps in front of the hospital? After all, should the street sweeper fail in their relatively minor and unimportant task, then where would the brain surgeon be? Unable to get up the stairs, or falling down as a result of debris or algae or whatever else might occur, should they not have done their job, that is, the street cleaner. In other words, the positions which we think of as least important, in fact, are extremely important. Our current situation in the United States today and around the world is demonstrating this to us. The people who make food, people who work in fast food restaurants, who make deliveries, people who work in grocery stores and supermarkets, these are the people who drive trucks and so on. These are the ones who are essentially serving our society now. These are people who are in large part considered to be unimportant, but now, under the current circumstances, they're seen as essential. What we should learn from this dates back to what we know from Emile Durkheim. Emile Durkheim says that in a modern society with an extreme division of labor, many different occupations, thousands of different occupations, that even the least important of these occupations is part of a system which is economically interdependent. All of us rely upon one another in ways that we don't even realize. When you flip the light switch on, you are making contact with hundreds of people all over the earth that have explored for resources, extracted resources, delivered resources, refined resources, transformed resources into electricity, and delivered that electricity. The flip of the switch seems magical because the light instantly happens, but you're actually depending upon the work of hundreds of people who you'll never know, you'll never meet, you'll never see. And some of those people would be in positions that would be considered by Davis and Moore unimportant positions, not essential. Second position, the second premise is that the very most important positions in society should be occupied by the most capable individuals. This assumes a meritocracy in the United States. Meritocracy makes reference to when all positions within a society or a culture are awarded on the basis of skill, awarded on the basis of qualifications, awarded on the basis of capabilities. But in the United States, as is the case elsewhere in the world, there's a great deal of nepotism, a great deal of favoritism. Virtually every one of you listening to this video right now have either had a job from a family member or a friend of a family member, or will at some point in your lives. And if you haven't personally experienced that, you certainly know others who have. In other words, nepotism, giving jobs to one's own family members, or favoritism, giving jobs to those who we already know or who have been put in contact with us by our own family. Those are rather rampant. The most qualified individual does not always occupy the most important position. And I think if you think about this long and hard for just a second, you'll realize that there are some extremely important positions which are currently quite obviously not occupied by the most qualified individuals. Another one of the premises which is put forward by the Davis-Moore thesis is that the most important positions in society must be the most highly rewarded. We should take that under consideration for just a moment. Yes, the brain surgeon is obviously a very highly paid individual, but a lot of people in society are highly paid, even more so than a brain surgeon, who are arguably not nearly so important for society's well-being. For instance, professional athletes and entertainers typically have a far higher income than the vast majority of other people. And CEOs, top-level executive managers, presidents of corporations, frequently make along the order of 300 to 400 times more than their average employee does. This means that a CEO makes more in 1 hour than his average employee, not his lowest paid, but his average employee makes in a month. So this is really dramatic inequality on an economic level. Those people who are making the very most money, rock stars and actors and professional athletes, are not on par or caliber with the brain surgeons in terms of their importance to society, yet more highly rewarded. And last but not least, Davis and Moore make the argument that the most highly paid positions should be functionally unique. They should be like no others. Well, I would argue that while what a brain surgeon does is obviously something which is highly technical and quite functionally unique, if you took that same brain surgeon and put he or she in front of the grill at a very busy Waffle House or IHOP restaurant and expected them to put out dozens of meals at once, on time, and perfectly, you'd probably find that the brain surgeon would be incapable of doing so. I'm pointing to the fact that being a fry cook or the person who stands behind the counter cooking for you at Waffle House or IHOP is a highly specialized position. And in fact, even what would seem to be the simplest occupations, those that pay most lowly, are fairly specialized if they're to be done correctly and efficiently. So the idea that rewards should be specific to occupations which are unique is potentially meaningless, in that, once again, coming from Durkheim's perspective, since organic solidarity depends upon economic interdependence, they're not unique. All of the occupations, all of the over 4,000 unique occupations that are listed in the U.S. Occupational Registry are, in fact, do require, I should say, unique skill sets. So, taking that into consideration, on many levels, the Davis-Moore thesis, which argues that social inequality is functional for society, it causes people to do their best, it causes them to do their hardest work, it causes them to accomplish their finest accomplishments. There is obviously some degree of validity to the argument, but upon close examination, I hope you realize, on the basis of what I've just been telling you, that there are many flawed assumptions, and that's why, with regards to the analysis of social inequality in society, conflict theory as a paradigm, as an overarching set of ideas about the way things are organized, tends to be more useful, not functional, but more useful in terms of the overall analysis. To encapsulate the principal point, social stratification is the hierarchical arrangement of large social groups on the basis of their access to and or control over valued resources in a society. All societies are stratified. Open systems and closed systems both exist. And the expansion of the division of labor transforms closed systems into open systems eventually. Keeping those things in mind, please pay attention to the other materials that I've posted with regards to social stratification and social inequality in the United States. Have a nice afternoon.